Something unusual is happening inside the Cleveland Browns organization. Quiet conversations, draft rumors, and quarterback debates are starting to build serious tension. Is the team secretly preparing for a major shift at QB? And could Shedeur Sanders suddenly become the center of Cleveland's most unexpected gamble yet? Something unusual is brewing around the quarterback situation in Cleveland, and it's starting to catch the attention of fans, analysts, and even former players. Inside conversations about the future QB1 have begun surfacing, and one name continues to show up in those discussions: Shedeur Sanders. Several Browns veterans have hinted that the organization may already be thinking ahead to its long-term quarterback plan. While nothing has been officially announced, subtle comments during interviews and off-season conversations have sparked speculation that the team is closely evaluating Sanders as a potential future leader of the offense. What makes the situation interesting is the timing. The Browns already have quarterbacks on the roster competing for control of the offense, yet the conversation keeps drifting toward what the team might do in the near future. Veterans speaking to media members have suggested that the front office and coaching staff are paying serious attention to Sanders' development and leadership qualities. According to those familiar with the discussions, the buzz isn't just about raw talent. Many around the league believe Sanders brings something different to the table: confidence, composure, and the kind of presence that can command a locker room. Those traits are often just as important as arm strength or athletic ability when teams are evaluating their next franchise quarterback. Some Browns players reportedly believe the organization is quietly preparing for a major quarterback transition in the coming seasons. That doesn't necessarily mean an immediate change, but it does suggest that Cleveland's decision-makers are carefully studying every possible option. Observers around the league have also pointed out that Sanders has been gaining serious attention from scouts and executives. His performances have sparked debate about where he could land in future drafts and which teams might view him as a potential franchise cornerstone. For Cleveland, the stakes are enormous. Finding the right quarterback can define an entire decade for a franchise. The Browns have experienced years of instability at the position, and the pressure to finally secure a long-term solution is immense. That's why even small comments from veterans are being analyzed so closely. When experienced players start mentioning a young quarterback as someone to watch, it often reflects conversations happening behind closed doors. Of course, none of this guarantees that Sanders will eventually wear a Browns uniform. Draft decisions depend on countless factors: performance, team needs, draft position, and front office strategy. But the growing chatter suggests that Cleveland is at least considering the possibility. For now, the QB1 conversation remains unofficial, speculative, and filled with intrigue. Yet one thing is clear: the name Shedeur Sanders has entered the Browns' long-term quarterback discussion, and that alone is enough to raise eyebrows across the NFL world. As the spotlight turned toward the annual scouting showcase at the NFL Scouting Combine, the focus wasn't only on 40-yard dash times or bench press numbers. Behind the scenes, conversations among executives, scouts, and coaches began revealing something far more interesting: the evolving mindset of the Cleveland Browns. Every year, the Combine serves as a critical meeting ground for decision-makers across the league. While prospects go through drills and interviews, team leadership quietly evaluates long-term roster plans. For Cleveland, reports suggest those discussions centered heavily on the future of the quarterback position. League insiders noted that Browns representatives appeared unusually engaged in conversations surrounding one particular prospect, Shedeur Sanders. While teams typically scout dozens of players at the event, several observers pointed out that Cleveland's interest in Sanders seemed especially deliberate. This doesn't necessarily mean the Browns are committed to drafting him. But in the world of NFL scouting, consistent attention from a team can signal deeper curiosity about how a player might fit into their future plans. Another layer of intrigue comes from the team's leadership structure. Head coach Kevin Stefanski and the front office have repeatedly emphasized building stability at the most important position in football. The Browns have invested heavily in their roster over the past few seasons, but the quarterback conversation still lingers as a central question. At the Combine, teams often conduct private interviews with prospects to evaluate their leadership, football IQ, and personality. Reports suggest Sanders impressed several organizations during those meetings. His confidence and communication skills reportedly stood out, reinforcing the perception that he carries himself like a future franchise quarterback. Observers also noticed that Cleveland scouts spent considerable time reviewing Sanders' game film and discussing his progression as a passer. These types of evaluations are routine during the combine, but when multiple insiders notice a pattern, it tends to spark speculation. What surprised some league personnel was the tone of the conversations surrounding Cleveland's approach. Rather than focusing strictly on immediate roster needs, the Browns appeared to be thinking several years ahead. That kind of long-term planning often signals that a team is preparing for a potential transition at a key position. Veteran players across the league understand how these subtle signals work. When front offices start exploring future quarterback options during events like the Combine, it usually means they want to keep every possibility on the table. Still, it's important to remember that the Combine is only one piece of the puzzle. Draft boards shift constantly, and teams frequently change strategies depending on how the draft unfolds. But the quiet buzz coming out of Indianapolis suggested something noteworthy. The Browns weren't just evaluating quarterbacks out of routine curiosity. They were studying the position with a level of focus that hinted at a much larger decision waiting somewhere down the road. To understand why the quarterback conversation around the Cleveland Browns refuses to fade, you have to go back to one of the most controversial decisions the franchise has made in the modern NFL era. The moment Cleveland traded for Deshaun Watson, the entire direction of the organization changed overnight. At the time, the Browns believed they were acquiring a long-term franchise quarterback, the type of player capable of transforming a team from playoff hopeful to legitimate contender. Watson had already proven himself as one of the league's most talented passers during his earlier years with the Houston Texans. His arm talent, mobility, and playmaking ability made him one of the most exciting quarterbacks in football. But the move immediately came with enormous risk. Cleveland not only traded significant draft capital to acquire Watson, they also handed him one of the most talked-about contracts in league history, a fully guaranteed deal worth hundreds of millions. In a league where guaranteed money is usually limited for quarterbacks, that decision raised eyebrows across front offices and media circles. Some analysts believed the Browns were making a bold move to secure elite talent. Others argued the team had placed an extraordinary amount of pressure on one player to deliver immediate results. And that's where the situation becomes complicated. Watson's time in Cleveland has been closely scrutinized since the day he arrived. Injuries, inconsistent performances, and constant national attention have made his tenure far more turbulent than many expected. Every game, every throw, and every injury update seems to trigger a new wave of discussion about the team's long-term strategy. Inside the league, executives pay attention to these situations carefully. When a franchise invests that level of money and draft capital into a quarterback, the expectation is stability for many years. But if the results don't match the investment, questions naturally begin to surface. That doesn't necessarily mean the Browns are abandoning their plan. Far from it. Publicly, the organization has continued to express confidence in Watson as their starting quarterback. However, the NFL is a league built on preparation. Teams constantly evaluate potential future scenarios even when they appear committed to their current starter. Scouts, coaches, and executives are always studying the next generation of quarterbacks, just in case circumstances change faster than expected. That's why conversations surrounding prospects like Shedeur Sanders have quietly gained traction in league circles. No one inside Cleveland has officially linked the two situations. But when a franchise that invested heavily in one quarterback begins closely studying the next wave of talent, it inevitably sparks debate. Because in the NFL, the most difficult question any team can face is also the most important one. What happens if the original plan doesn't unfold the way everyone expected? Every NFL offseason brings speculation, but for the Cleveland Browns, the upcoming draft carries a different level of attention. The reason is simple. When a franchise faces uncertainty at quarterback, every scouting move suddenly becomes headline material. And this year, the spotlight has quietly started shifting toward one name, Shedeur Sanders. Sanders has built a reputation as one of the most talked-about young quarterbacks in college football. Playing under the guidance of his father, Deion Sanders, his development has been closely followed by fans, analysts, and NFL scouts alike. His accuracy, composure under pressure, and confidence in big moments have made him one of the most intriguing prospects of the upcoming draft class. But the conversation around Sanders goes far beyond his statistics. His presence brings attention. Cameras follow him, debates erupt across sports networks. Some analysts believe he has the tools to become a franchise quarterback at the next level. Others remain cautious, pointing out that the transition from college football to the NFL is never guaranteed. That split in opinion has only intensified the curiosity surrounding teams that might show interest in him. For Cleveland, the timing is especially interesting. The organization is still publicly committed to Deshaun Watson as their starting quarterback. Team leadership has repeatedly reinforced that message, emphasizing stability and patience. But the NFL draft is rarely just about the present. Front offices constantly evaluate future possibilities, even when the current depth chart appears set. Injuries, performance fluctuations, and salary cap pressures can change a team's direction faster than anyone expects. Because of that reality, scouting departments often monitor top quarterback prospects regardless of their immediate needs. That's where speculation begins to grow. Some fans believe the Browns could explore drafting a young quarterback as a long-term developmental option. Others argue the team simply doesn't have the draft capital or roster flexibility to make such a move right now. There are also reports and rumors circulating across NFL media suggesting that multiple teams, not just Cleveland, are keeping a close eye on Sanders' development. Scouts across the league have reportedly attended games and evaluated his progress closely. Of course, those evaluations are standard practice for any highly ranked quarterback prospect. Still, when a player carries both talent and star power, the discussions tend to grow louder. Sanders also brings something else that organizations consider carefully: leadership presence. Teammates often describe him as confident and vocal, someone comfortable carrying the expectations of a high-profile program. That type of personality can be valuable in the NFL, where quarterbacks are expected to command an entire locker room. But drafting a quarterback is never a simple decision. Teams must weigh financial commitments, roster balance, coaching philosophy, and long-term strategy. A single draft pick can reshape a franchise's future for better or worse. And that's why the Browns' potential draft decisions have started to attract so much attention. Because if Cleveland chooses to even consider a quarterback prospect like Shedeur Sanders, it wouldn't just be another draft selection. It would signal that the organization is quietly preparing for possibilities far beyond the upcoming season. Sometimes, a single off-season visit can spark more conversation than an entire week of press conferences. That's exactly what happened when reports surfaced that Carnell Tate had spent time around the Cleveland Browns organization. At first glance, it didn't seem like a major headline. Teams constantly evaluate young talent, host visits, and build relationships with prospects long before draft decisions are made. It's part of the normal scouting process across the league. But this particular visit quickly caught the attention of fans and analysts alike. Tate, one of the most highly regarded young receivers in college football, has been steadily building a reputation as a dynamic playmaker. Known for his smooth route running, reliable hands, and ability to create separation, he's already generated significant buzz among scouts. What made the situation interesting wasn't just Tate's talent, it was the timing. The Browns have been navigating questions about the direction of their offense and the future of their quarterback situation. Whenever a team is under that kind of microscope, even routine scouting activity can take on a deeper meaning. And that's exactly what happened here. Some fans began speculating about what the visit might signal. Was Cleveland simply doing standard homework on a promising receiver prospect? Or could the front office be quietly exploring ways to reshape the offense in the coming seasons? Those questions quickly spread across social media and sports talk shows. Of course, it's important to remember that visits like this happen across the NFL every year. Teams meet with dozens of players leading up to the draft. Many of those meetings never lead to actual draft selections. Still, certain names naturally draw more attention than others. Tate has been widely praised for his consistency and maturity on the field. Coaches have highlighted his football IQ, while teammates have described him as a player who brings energy to every practice. That kind of reputation often makes prospects even more appealing to NFL organizations. But there may be another reason the visit sparked curiosity. The Browns have spent years trying to build a balanced offensive identity. Adding explosive receivers has always been part of that plan. When a player with Tate's profile appears on the team's radar, people naturally begin imagining how he might fit into the system. Some fans even started connecting dots between potential offensive changes and long-term roster planning. Of course, none of that is confirmed. Visits alone don't guarantee draft intentions. In many cases, they simply allow teams to learn more about a player's personality, work ethic, and preparation habits. But in the NFL, perception often moves faster than facts. Once the story of Tate's visit began circulating, it didn't take long for the conversation to grow. Analysts debated whether Cleveland might be planning to strengthen its receiving core in a major way. Others dismissed the speculation as routine off-season scouting. And in truth, both explanations could be valid. The Browns could simply be gathering information on talented prospects like Carnell Tate, something every team does during draft preparation. At the same time, smart organizations always keep their options open. Because when draft day finally arrives, the teams that prepared for every possibility are usually the ones that make the most confident decisions. But even with all the speculation surrounding this visit, one reality remains clear. The Browns' off-season moves are being watched more closely than ever, and every small development seems to add another layer to the story. While the spotlight often falls on quarterbacks, wide receivers, and flashy offensive plays, there is one area of the Cleveland Browns roster that may ultimately determine how successful the offense can be moving forward: the offensive line. It's not the most glamorous position group, but anyone who truly understands football knows that games are often won or lost in the trenches. Right now, the Browns are facing a very real question about the stability of that unit. Several offensive linemen are approaching free agency, and depth across the line has become a growing concern. When multiple positions on the line are uncertain, it creates a domino effect across the entire offense. Protection schemes become harder to maintain, play calling becomes limited, and quarterbacks are forced to make quicker decisions under pressure. And that's where things get complicated. If the Browns plan to move forward with quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson or Shedeur Sanders competing for control of the offense, protection will be absolutely critical. Quarterbacks can only execute the game plan if they have enough time to read the defense, move through their progressions, and deliver accurate passes. Without that protection, even the most talented quarterbacks can struggle. Throughout the league, we've seen how quickly an offense can collapse when the offensive line breaks down. Quarterbacks begin taking unnecessary hits, timing routes fall apart, and the rhythm of the offense disappears. That's why many analysts believe strengthening the offensive line should be one of Cleveland's top priorities. Some observers believe the Browns could use early draft picks to reinforce the line. Others think the front office might target experienced veterans through free agency to stabilize the unit immediately. Both approaches have their advantages. Drafting young linemen provides long-term stability and allows the coaching staff to develop players within their system. On the other hand, veteran signings can offer instant experience and leadership in the locker room. But regardless of the path Cleveland chooses, the underlying issue remains the same. The offensive line must be solid if the Browns want to compete consistently. For offensive coaches, the line is the foundation that everything else is built on. It dictates how aggressive the play calling can be. It determines whether the running game can establish momentum, and it directly affects the confidence level of the quarterback under center. If protection holds, the entire playbook opens up. But if defenders are constantly breaking through the line, the offense becomes predictable and limited. That's why conversations around Cleveland's roster construction often return to this same point. Even when fans are debating quarterback battles, draft prospects, or potential trades, the offensive line quietly remains one of the most important factors in the team's future. and it's something that the coaching staff is fully aware of. Modern offenses rely heavily on timing, spacing, and precision. None of that works if the quarterback is under immediate pressure every time the ball is snapped. So while headlines might focus on skill position players or exciting offseason rumors, the real work often happens in the trenches. That's where championships are built. If the Browns can stabilize their offensive line, they give themselves a chance to unlock the full potential of their offensive weapons. Quarterbacks gain confidence, receivers have more time to get open, and the running game becomes far more effective. In other words, fixing the offensive line could solve multiple problems at once. Because in the NFL, talent at the skill positions may grab the headlines, but the strength of the offensive line is what often determines whether an offense truly succeeds or struggles when the season begins. Sometimes the most important figure in a quarterback conversation isn't the quarterback at all. Sometimes it's the coach designing the system, calling the plays, and shaping the identity of the offense. And in this situation, that conversation keeps circling back to Todd Monken. Monken has built a reputation across college football and the NFL as a coordinator who isn't afraid to adapt. His offenses have ranged from high-tempo passing attacks to balanced systems built around strong run games. That flexibility is exactly why many analysts believe his role could quietly influence how the Browns approach their quarterback situation. Because when a team is evaluating potential starters, they aren't just asking who the most talented player is. They're asking which quarterback best fits the system the coaching staff wants to run. And Monken's philosophy has always leaned toward aggressive, vertical offense. During his previous coaching stops, Monken's playbooks often featured deep passing concepts, quick reads, and wide formations designed to stretch defenses. Quarterbacks in those systems needed confidence, quick decision-making, and the ability to attack downfield. That kind of system naturally raises an interesting question. Which quarterback fits that vision best? Some observers believe that a young quarterback like Shedeur Sanders could thrive in a modern, spread-style offense that emphasizes tempo and deep passing opportunities. Sanders built his reputation in college football with strong pocket presence and the ability to extend plays when pressure arrives. Supporters argue that those traits could align well with an offense that wants to push the ball downfield and keep defenses guessing. But the situation is not that simple. Veteran quarterbacks often bring a completely different set of advantages. Experience reading NFL defenses, understanding complex coverages, and adjusting protections at the line can be just as valuable as raw athletic ability. That's why the presence of a veteran like Deshaun Watson continues to be part of the conversation. Watson has already played in multiple offensive systems during his career. When healthy and in rhythm, he has shown the ability to operate both structured passing attacks and improvisational plays outside the pocket. And for a coordinator like Monken, having a quarterback capable of executing multiple styles can open up the entire playbook. Still, offensive coordinators are rarely given the luxury of designing systems in a vacuum. Their plans depend heavily on roster construction, front office strategy, and the long-term direction of the franchise. That's where things become especially interesting in Cleveland. If the Browns decide to prioritize long-term development, some analysts believe the team could lean toward building an offense around a younger quarterback with room to grow. But if the goal is immediate playoff contention, the coaching staff may prefer the stability and experience of a proven veteran. Both directions come with risks. Developing a young quarterback requires patience, consistency, and the willingness to accept early growing pains. On the other hand, relying on a veteran means placing faith in a player who must stay healthy and perform under increasing expectations. And somewhere in the middle of that debate sits Todd Monken, designing game plans and evaluating how each quarterback fits into the broader offensive vision. Coaches often speak about rhythm when describing successful offenses, timing between quarterbacks and receivers, protection schemes that give plays time to develop, a system where every player understands exactly where the ball is supposed to go. When that rhythm clicks, an offense can become extremely difficult to stop. But when the pieces don't quite fit together, even talented rosters can struggle to find consistency. That's why some insiders believe the Browns' quarterback decision may ultimately depend less on headlines and more on quiet meetings inside the coaching offices. Film sessions, scheme discussions, honest evaluations of what type of offense the team wants to run in the next few seasons. And Monken's voice in those discussions could carry significant weight. Because offensive coordinators aren't just calling plays on Sunday afternoons. They are shaping the identity of the team's attack, deciding whether it will be aggressive or conservative, explosive or methodical. If the Browns want to build an offense capable of competing with the league's most dynamic teams, the system must match the strengths of the quarterback leading it. And that is why the Todd Monken factor may end up being one of the most important pieces of this entire situation. Not because he throws the passes, but because he decides how the offense is built around the person who does. For years, the identity of the Cleveland Browns has been tied to instability, coaching changes, quarterback experiments, draft picks that never fully developed. For a long time, the conversation around the franchise was less about winning and more about what went wrong next. But lately, something about the atmosphere around the team feels different. It isn't just about wins or losses, it's about perception. Over the past several months, the discussion around the Browns has started to shift in a way many fans haven't seen in years. Instead of constant skepticism, there's a growing sense of curiosity about what this roster could become. And much of that conversation centers around one name, Shedeur Sanders. Even before taking an NFL snap, Sanders has managed to spark a level of attention that Browns fans are not used to seeing around a rookie quarterback. His confidence, his presence in media interviews, and his leadership style have already made him one of the most talked-about young players connected to the franchise. Some fans believe that kind of personality is exactly what Cleveland has been missing. Others remain cautious, reminding everyone that hype alone doesn't win games in the NFL. But even the skeptics admit that the energy surrounding the team feels noticeably stronger than it did a year ago. Part of that excitement comes from the potential competition at quarterback. The Browns still have a veteran presence in Deshaun Watson, and whenever a rookie challenges an established starter, the situation immediately becomes one of the most closely watched storylines on the roster. Competition creates urgency, and urgency can sometimes push teams to perform at a higher level. Some reports suggest the coaching staff wants to create a genuine battle rather than simply handing the starting job to one player. If that approach holds true, it could force every quarterback in the room to elevate their preparation and performance. Fans tend to respond strongly to that kind of internal competition because it signals something important: accountability. For years, critics argued that the Browns lacked a consistent culture. Too many roster changes, too many system shifts, and too many seasons where expectations collapsed before December. But culture can change quickly when a team finds the right combination of leadership and talent. Supporters of Sanders often point to his background as evidence that he understands how to handle pressure. Growing up under the spotlight of Deion Sanders meant constant attention from media and fans. Every game, every interview, every decision carried extra scrutiny. That environment can either overwhelm a young quarterback or prepare him for the spotlight of the NFL. Some fans believe it has prepared him, and that belief is starting to spread across social media and sports talk shows. Of course, not everyone is ready to declare a full cultural transformation just yet. Critics argue that real change only happens on the field. Wins, playoff appearances, and consistent performance are the only things that truly reshape a franchise's reputation. They're not wrong. The NFL has seen countless off-season storylines that looked exciting in March but faded by October. Still, even those skeptics acknowledge something interesting: people are paying attention to the Browns again. The combination of a potentially dynamic young quarterback, an experienced veteran, and a coaching staff trying to redefine the offense has created a storyline that fans across the league are following. And when national attention returns to a franchise that spent years fighting irrelevance, that alone signals a shift in perception. But perception can be fragile. If the team struggles early in the season, the excitement could disappear just as quickly as it arrived. Critics will return, doubts will grow louder, and every decision from the coaching staff will face intense scrutiny. That's the reality of the NFL. Yet for the first time in a while, Browns fans seem to feel something that has been missing for years. Possibility. Not certainty, not guaranteed success, just the sense that the team might finally be moving in a direction that feels different from the past. Whether that optimism proves justified will depend on what happens once the season actually begins. Because off-season excitement can only carry a team so far. Eventually, every narrative meets the same test, the games themselves. And when that moment arrives, the Browns won't just be trying to win football games. They'll be trying to prove that the culture everyone is starting to talk about is real. For the Cleveland Browns, the upcoming season feels like more than just another year on the schedule. It feels like a turning point. A moment where several complicated storylines finally collide: quarterback uncertainty, roster construction, coaching philosophy, and the expectations of an entire fan base that has waited a long time for stability. At the center of that conversation is the quarterback position. For months, analysts, insiders, and fans have debated what the future might look like for the Browns under center. The presence of Deshaun Watson still carries major financial and strategic implications for the franchise. His contract, his experience, and his past success make him a key figure in the team's plans, whether critics like it or not. But football decisions are rarely simple. Because at the same time, another name has begun to dominate the conversation: Shedeur Sanders. Some fans believe Sanders represents the kind of fresh start the organization has been searching for. His confidence, his leadership style, and his ability to perform under pressure have made him one of the most intriguing young quarterbacks connected to the team. Others remain cautious. Rookie hype can be powerful, but the NFL has a long history of prospects who looked promising before the games actually began. Still, the idea of a competition between Watson and Sanders has sparked one of the most fascinating off-season debates surrounding the Browns. And that debate extends far beyond just the quarterback room. Because if the Browns truly want to build around a young passer, the roster must evolve alongside him. Offensive protection, reliable receivers, and a system designed to support a developing quarterback all become critical pieces of the puzzle. That's why draft discussions have become so intense. Some reports suggest the team could prioritize adding offensive weapons or strengthening the offensive line. Others claim the front office might explore the possibility of trading back in the draft to accumulate future assets. Nothing is guaranteed yet. As many league insiders often remind fans, draft plans can change quickly depending on how the board unfolds. But what remains clear is that the Browns are navigating one of the most delicate strategic moments in recent franchise history. Because every decision they make now will influence the direction of the organization for years. And the pressure to get it right is enormous. Fans in Cleveland have experienced countless cycles of hope and disappointment. Every new quarterback, every coaching hire, every draft class has carried the promise that things would finally change. Sometimes those hopes faded faster than expected. Yet the current situation feels slightly different. Part of that is due to the sheer level of attention surrounding the quarterback storyline. Part of it comes from the growing belief among some supporters that the team may finally be willing to take bold steps to reshape its identity. But belief alone doesn't build a winning franchise. Execution does. If the Browns successfully develop the right offensive pieces, stabilize their quarterback situation, and build a system that maximizes talent on the roster, this could be the moment where the narrative around the franchise truly begins to shift. But if the decisions fail to produce results, the criticism will return quickly. That's the reality of the NFL. Every move, from draft selections to depth chart decisions, will be examined closely by fans, analysts, and media outlets. And when the season begins, the speculation will give way to something far more important: results. Because in the end, no amount of off-season optimism can replace what happens on the field. For the Cleveland Browns, the coming months represent a test of vision, leadership, and patience. The front office must balance long-term strategy with immediate expectations. The coaching staff must create an environment where competition brings out the best in every player. And the roster itself must prove that the potential everyone is talking about can translate into actual performance. Only then will the questions surrounding the franchise begin to fade. Until that moment arrives, the Browns remain exactly where many teams in the NFL eventually find themselves, standing at a crossroads. One path leads to renewed belief and a new era of competitiveness. The other leads back to the familiar cycle of uncertainty. And right now, the entire football world is watching to see which direction Cleveland chooses.